because I may say some things today that are slightly controversial, and you're going to make sure I'm saying it from the Bible, not just making it up as I go along. So it's good to have that open in front of you as we look at this passage together. Words we want to take seriously because Jesus took them seriously. Jesus quoted Genesis 1 and 2 as from God. We're in this series at the moment, God, the world, and us. And last week, I asked the question, what makes God, God? What makes God, God? And the answer we saw in the first 25 verses of Genesis, God is the personal, totally good, totally powerful creator of everything. That's what we saw, how immense God is as he creates the world. Here's today's question. What makes a human a human? What makes a human rather than an animal, just a normal animal? An article in Psychology Today said, scholars boldly assert that humans are unique because of such things as language, foresight, mind reading, intelligence, culture, or morality. Do you think those things are what makes us human? But studies have regularly claimed and demonstrated that animals have those capacities that we believe to be uniquely human. What does it mean to be human? Are we just the next stage of the evolutionary chain of animals? Well, this next part of Genesis helps us understand what it means to be uniquely and specially human. They help us to understand God's plan for mankind, personkind, to flourish. Now, I've got some images here. There we go. Guess what I'm trying to get across in those images? Well, that top one. What's she doing? We've got wind, yeah. We've got thinking. What do you think the bottom left is? Love. Now, all those things are invisible, aren't they? Yeah? Wind is invisible. Love is invisible. It's an abstract concept in a way. So thought is invisible. But all these are images trying to get across something that's invisible so that we can understand it a bit in a visible way. Well, the Bible tells us that God is invisible. He is spirit. And yet in Genesis 1, he makes an image to represent him. Have a look at verse 26 of chapter 1. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And then as we move on to verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. And so mankind, humankind, are made in God's image. Interesting, as we read through Genesis, the sun and the moon, they are not made in God's image. The animals, the plants, they're not made in God's image. We are made in God's image uniquely as humans. You are special. You're not special because of your intelligence or your achievements. You're special because you're made in God's image. You have an innate dignity. Not because of your physical abilities or your age or your language or your morality or your cognitive ability. You have a unique dignity because God made you in his likeness. Whatever your age, whatever your stage, whatever your colour, whatever your creed. That's why as we read through God's law in the Bible, he seeks to protect human life above everything else. historians looking back at atrocities of the past note that the first step to a genocide is often dehumanization. So during the Holocaust, the Nazis referred to Jews as rats, subhuman. In the Rwandan genocide, the Tutsis were called cockroaches. Can you see the logic when you try and dehumanize someone? Take away their preciousness, and you can do whatever you want to them. And actually, we've got to be careful because similar arguments are sometimes used to justify abortion and euthanasia. Any argument that says, oh, they don't have the cognitive ability or the physical independence, or they're of no value to society, and so we can do what we want to them, they're not really human. Christians can't say that. Because the Bible makes it very clear that what makes us special isn't our physical abilities, it is being made in the image of God, fearfully and wonderfully made. Humans are made in God's image. We protect life. And then the second thing we see in these verses is that humans are made male and female. Verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God created this wonderfully diverse men and women, and we are different, aren't we? Yeah. That's part of God's good creation. That difference, that diversity. It's actually part of how we best flourish and obey God and serve him and enjoy his world is grasping hold of the fact that we are male and female. Now, this wouldn't have been controversial 20 years ago, but actually it is nowadays, isn't there, in some ways? The Bible's very clear. There's not 3 genders or 10 genders or a gender spectrum. There are 2 biological sexes that are the 2 genders that God has made for us, male and female. And living those identities out is what's best for us. To be made in the image of God. So that's humans. Humans are made in God's image, male and female. But what are we to do? When I was a kid, I don't know if you've got kids like this. When I was a kid, my dad would be busy doing something. I used to go, Dad, what are you doing, Dad? Can I help you? Can I help you? Yeah, come on, do this. Hammer this nail in. I wanted a role. I wanted a purpose. God has given us as humans, made in his image, male and female, a role, a purpose in this world. Very clear. It gives us, you might say, a job description. And it's 4 things I've come up with, beginning with R in this job description. There were 6 things, but I thought you'd get bored if I did 6 things. So I've made it 4 things. Okay, so put a few together. Okay, so what are humans to do? The first things humans are to do are to relate. These verses in Genesis, I love studying Genesis. I've been studying it for decades, and I still learn new things every time I look at it. They're fascinating. God, every time God creates something, have a look back in chapter 1. He says, and God, so verse 3, God said, let there be light. Verse 6, God said, let there be. Verse 9, God said, let the water, and so on. God said, let the land produce livestock. Verse 24. But then he gets to verse 26, and he says it differently when he creates mankind. It says, verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image. So in the act of creating man, God talks about himself in the plural. Yeah? Now, actually, we know as New Testament Christians, we've got the whole Bible, that God is Trinity. He is one, but three. A perfect relationship for all eternity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And in the act of creating mankind, God puts some of that relationship into it. Talks about the plural. He makes us relational. That's what it means to be made in God's image. It's one of the reasons lockdown and self-isolation cause so many problems. Because we're made to relate. That's how God's made us. That's why when people are lonely, have no contacts, it almost shrivels them up, doesn't it? Because it's not how they're made. Genesis 1 teaches us that human purpose, human flourishing, involves a relationship with Him and others. Relationships aren't always easy, but we're to work at them. We're to invest in them and not withdraw from them, because that is how we flourish, that is how we're made. And that's why one of the reasons it was so great to see everyone, all ages and stages here this morning. Because what are we doing as we come to church on a Sunday? We're relating to God. We're relating to each other. We do stick around for a brew at the end. We're doing what we were made to do. And there is joy in that. Made to relate. Secondly, made to reproduce. Now, people often find God's commands, God gives all these commands that are really annoying, and it's really negative. Have a look at verse 28. What's the very first command God gives to humans? God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth. If you're married, have lots of sex," he's saying. Have lots of babies. And he's made it fun, so we can do it more. He wants us to fill the earth. Children are such a blessing, aren't they? And not being able to have children for whatever reason is often hard. Because part of what it means to be human is to reproduce. But actually, as we come to the New Testament, we see that all Christians, whether they've got biological children or not, whether they're single or married, have a role in this. Jesus says to his followers before he goes up to heaven, "Go and make disciples of all nations." Go and reproduce Christians everywhere. Share with them the good news. Help them understand who I am and my teaching. Reproduce. King Jesus commands his church to be fruitful and multiply, to make disciples of all nations who will one day reign with him in the new heavens and earth. Reproduce. Thirdly, rule responsibly. They're my two R's in one. That's the second command God gives. Verse 28 again. So God blessed them, said, "Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." To subdue the earth is to work the earth, to rule the earth, to order the earth. Even though God made a very good world, it seems from what we read that it was still wild. It was in need of taming, of gardening, of ordering. And we're made as humans to work, to take responsibility. Work is good. I know it sometimes doesn't feel like it, but work is good. At least it was supposed to be. That's why, have you ever felt, I'm sure you've done this. You finish a project, you've built your house. Yeah. You finish your project. And there's a sense of satisfaction, isn't there? Job well done. Yes. It's God inspired. Work is good. It's hard when we can't work. And in this world God's made, there's always something to do. We might not always get paid for it. There's always some good things to do, isn't there? I was talking to a retired vicar earlier, a few weeks ago. And I said, are you enjoying retired life? And he said, I'm not retired. I'm a pensioner. It's different. He's trying to get across. He's still doing the Lord's work. He's just getting paid in a different way from his pension. We weren't created to get to 65 or 68 or probably by my, well, for me, 72 and stop work. Just looks different. Working for God. And we see it involves taking responsibility here as well. God says, this whole world, I've created this whole world for you. Imagine that responsibility. You've got the whole world sorted out. Yeah? I thought being a vicar was hard. There is a problem sometimes, and sometimes it's among young men, of not taking responsibility, of not being willing to step up. And in a way, I get that. When I was 20 years old, I did not want any responsibility. But to get home, watch telly, play PlayStation, make myself some pasta, go to bed. Let me read what one author writes. Throughout life, we're tempted to shirk our responsibilities for our families, for our work, for our own lives. We run away from these things. We don't face up to problems. We procrastinate. We pass the buck. We're careless. I admit that I've sometimes looked at and envied our cat as he lies curled up on the rug. But to run away from responsibilities God has set before us is actually to deny the unique and privileged role God has given to those made in his image. Wherever we find ourselves, are we willing to take responsibility under God's rule responsibly? And then finally, receive and rest. To be made human is to be made dependent. So in verse 29 and verse 30, again, God is so good. What does he do? He says, I give you everything. It's yours. Have it. I've made it for you. Every seed-bearing plant, go and reproduce the plants with the seeds. Every beast to look after, it's yours. Make the most of it. Receive. To be human is to receive from God. To know his generosity to us. And then the first few verses of chapter 2 they give us something to help us remember God's generosity. So in chapter 2, verse 2, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he was doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Now, it's not that God decided he wouldn't be involved in the creation at all anymore, but he stopped creating. He'd done the work of creating. And then verse 3, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he had rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So God built into the fabric of time, the fabric of our society, a Sabbath day, which we have as Sunday now as Christians, a day of rest. Apparently the Russians tried a 5-day week at one point. Didn't work. Everyone was miserable. Yeah? God has built into our world this pattern where one of those days, this Sabbath days, is a day of rest, for us to stop, for us to enjoy, to receive and rest. It's a day I find helpful because every now and again I need to stop and remind myself that I'm not God. Yeah. I can't make people do what I want. I will never perfectly juggle family, career, fitness, and fun. Those things are just not possible, are they, to do all together? Have you tried it? At the moment, fitness is lacking. Yeah. Because we're not gods. But we have got a good God. We're precious to him. Set a day aside to enjoy him and know him better and realize he loves us and that he's in charge. That he says to us in Jesus, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." It's the God who restores our relationship with him that's broken by our sin, by sending Jesus to die for us on the cross to forgive us and to bring us into his family. The God who pours his grace out to us again and again and again. And the Sabbath is a great day to stop and remind ourselves of that. I was reading this book last year, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I liked it because it had big writing. It looks massive, the writing's massive, so that's all right. In fact, some of the pages have like really big writing. Yeah? Great. I think that's the importance of. Listen to what he writes about the Sabbath. There is a discipline to the Sabbath that is really hard for a lot of us. It takes a lot of intentionality. It won't just happen to you. It takes planning and preparation. For those who've got children to church this morning, you're aware of that, aren't you? It takes self-control. The capacity to say no to a list of good things so you can say yes to the best. I wonder how often we've said no to something on a Sunday so we can say yes to time with God. But Sabbath is the primary discipline or practice by which we cultivate the spirit of restfulness in our lives as a whole. The Sabbath is to a spirit of restfulness what football practice is to a match, or band practice is to a show. It's how we practice, how we prepare our minds and bodies for the moments that matter most. The author Walter Brueggemann has this great line: people who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. It's true. Watch out for the Sabbath. It will mess with you. First, it will mess with the one day of your week, then it will mess with your whole life. I'm so thankful to God that into what it means to be human and into the fabric of our world, he's given us time to rest and to receive. So let's just take a moment to reflect. Another R. We've seen what it means to be human, made in God's image, male and female. We've seen the job description: to relate, to reproduce, to rule, and to receive. Are you living those things out? Are you enjoying what it means to be made in God's image by living according to the Maker's instructions? Is there a particular one of those? Maybe it's relate to God and others in love, just as God is love. Maybe you've got children, you've reproduced, but it's important that we bring them up in the knowledge of God. Is it rule, taking responsibility in our lives? Or maybe you're here and you're knackered. And I just need to receive. Just need to rest. Enjoy God. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you in a few verses. You have, by your amazing and powerful and true words, shown us what it means to be humans, what it means to flourish in your world, what it means to live with you as our God. Please help us to do that moving forward. In Jesus' name, amen.